The notion of individuality is central for the theories of Western modern philosophy, and this concept has also had a profound influence on the formation of modern biology. In Darwin's theory, the individual has a central role in shaping all the evolutionary dynamics. But new theories that are now part of the extended evolutionary synthesis seem to prove it to be partially wrong. Today, for our series on the unsolved questions of evolutionary theory, we will discuss about this theme of individuality from a biological and maybe from a philosophical point of view. And we are pleased to host on ILBO Live Professor Scott Gilbert, who is Professor Emeritus of Biology at Swarthmore College and Professor Emeritus of Biology at the University of Helsinki. He's an expert in developmental biology and EcoDevo. Thank you, Professor Gilbert, for being here today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be even virtually in Padova. In the summer of 2019, I had a wonderful time there at the ISEB meetings. And I want to thank Sandro Minelli, Giuseppe Fusco, Chiara Papetti, Telmo Pevini, and Jacopo Sequena for making my time there so amazing. I guess I should also thank Giotto, Justo, and Fabrizio D'Acquapotente. It was just an incredible time that I had there. So thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome, and thank you. Let's head to the interview. In the past, some scientists have argued that in the whole biological world, the minimal unit of all life forms is the cell, the single cell. But is this really true in light of the new discoveries? Can we define the single cell as an individual? And in broader terms, what are the basic units of life?
Okay, you hit on a really good philosophical question here. And I contend, okay, you're getting my story. I contend that there are two long-standing traditions on how to characterize life. And I'm talking about characterize life, not define life, because Claude Bernard, who was one of the first cell physiologists, said it's a sterile notion to define life. You'll always find exceptions. It's best to characterize life. And the two traditions that have characterized life have been the tradition of metabolism and the tradition of replication. Now, metabolism is the incredible ability to retain your identity, to stay the same by changing your parts. This is what distinguishes you from non-living matter. So here, the unit of life is the cell. And Claude Bernard was indeed one of the major biologists who saw life as a cellular phenomenon. The metaphors that were used by these people who saw the cell, the metabolizing cell as the unit of life, was the whirlpool or the wave. So Cuvier says the living being is a whirlpool that's constantly turning in the same direction. So you could point to a wave on the beach and say, there's the wave, there's the wave, there's the wave, there's the wave, there's the same wave, but that wave is always changing its molecules of water. So Hans Jonas, the philosopher Hans Jonas, said that this was the best way of looking at life. Organisms don't have metabolism. Organisms are metabolism. And this is the worldview that biochemistry takes when it looks at life. Now, in addition to biochemistry, looking at the sine qua non of life, you also have molecular biology. So where does molecular biology differ from biochemistry? Molecular biology tends to look at replication as the characteristic that defines life. And replication is the incredible ability to grow and make more copies of yourself. Yes, the waterfall is fine, the whirlpool is fine, the wave is fine, but they're not making more of each other. So what distinguishes life from non-life here is replication. And the simplest unit of life in that view is the virus. DNA is the sine qua non of life. It was considered to be a self-replicating molecule, and indeed it could be crystallized. That's how its structure was elucidated, through crystallization. And crystals were the major metaphor for this view of life. You could see it in Schrodinger, you could see it as far back as Schleiden and Schwann, you could see it in Watson and Haldane. Here, the crystal was the view of life. Now, personally, I think the metabolic tradition serves scientists better. Indeed, DNA turned out not to be self-replicating. It uses enzymes for synthesis, but the enzyme that it uses, DNA polymerase, is a strange enzyme. It takes instructions from its template. Similarly, the Operon model united these two views of DNA and metabolism into an integrated scheme where DNA becomes part of metabolism, but it also is that which transfers the principles for metabolism to the next generation. So I think that we can go back to 1896, one of my favorite authors, E.B. Wilson, who says, inheritance is the recurrence in successive generations of like forms of metabolism. Put them together. So I think that what we have now is a kind of metabolic view of life where the DNA and the replicative mode fits into metabolism. I think also, as we'll discuss the holobiont in a moment, I suspect, and the notion of the body being a coherent assortment of microbes and various organisms put together, I think that you'll find the concept of co-metabolism is very important, that we have different genetically separate organisms in our body, but they all are metabolizing foods to a common end. And so that we now not only have metabolism, we have co-metabolism, where we have genetically distinct organisms working for common good.
We'll soon arrive to that notion, because although classical evolutionary theory talks about nature as a constant competition between individuals, new theories, EcoDevo, for example, tell a different story, a story made of cooperation, and they tell the fact that an organism is not a single individual, but is made of a set of cooperative organisms, maybe from different species, from different kingdoms in some cases. So how these discoveries are transforming, revolutionizing maybe the evolutionary biology, and how can we reconcile them with the classical evolutionary theory and maybe also with the modern synthesis?
Again, thank you for this question. Wow, this gets to the heart of matters. Okay, how does symbiotic theory, holobiont theory, change evolutionary biology? Okay, first I should discuss the notion of the holobiont, which is just the Greek for the whole organism, the whole being. It says that organisms are not composed of one cell lineage derived from the fertilized egg. That's the normal way we've been talking for generations about organisms, that they come from one source, either the fertilized egg or a bud from an organism or a rhizome from an organism. They are monogenomic, one lineage. Rather, the holobiont says that we are constructed from that lineage from the egg, but also we get added to this a consortium of microbes, that the holobiont, the whole organism, is the macrobiont, the host, plus its entire microbial community including cellular microorganisms and viruses. The host and its microbiome, according to holobiont theory, functions anatomically, physiologically, immunologically, developmentally, and behaviorally as a functional unit, the holobiont. And evolutionarily, the fitness of the holobiont depends in large part on the interactions between the microbe and the host. So let me give some examples. Anatomically, half the cells in our body are microbes. They have specific places that they exist in our body where they form ecosystems with other microbes and with the host cells. So we are not only individuals, we are biomes. We are collections of ecosystems. Now, physiologically, we partner with these microbes for digestion, for bone growth, for other metabolic functions. We have, as I mentioned, what Gordon calls co-metabolism. So let me give an example of co-metabolism. Think of a cow. A cow is a female bovine mammal, and you usually think of it eating grass. But there are no genes in the genome of a cow that allows her to digest grass. No mammal has genes that encode proteins to digest cellulose or hemicellulose or pectins. Those enzymes come from the genes that are in the gut microbes. Now, the gut of a ruminant, like a cow, has a specific portion in it called the rumen. And the rumen is where the digestion of the grasses and grains occurs. It is where those bacteria, fungi, archaea live, and they produce the enzymes that digest the grass. So the cow, as cow, just with a cow genome, is dead. No cow. We develop as holobionts as well. So anatomically and physiologically, we're holobionts. We develop as holobionts. That cow that I mentioned, that rumen is not functional until the bacteria get into it and start growing. The bacteria that they get as they pass through the birth canal of the mother, they get colonized by bacteria. The bacteria enter the gut, and when they enter the rumen, and when they're given grain for the first time, or grass, they start metabolizing. And the products they make cause the rumen to develop. The calf, before it eats grain, doesn't have a functional rumen. The rumen develops, and it develops through the products of bacteria. Now, you could think of bacteria as our mother's parting gift to us as we leave her body. As we pass through the birth canal, the bacteria in her birth canal get into ourselves, get into our guts. We breathe them in, we eat them in, we drink them in, they get into us. There, it's like the mother saying, you've been in me for a long while, but I can't complete your development. I'm going to give you some bacteria as you leave me. And those bacteria are going to mature the neurons in your gut so that you can undergo peristalsis. They will mature the immune cells such that you have an immune system. They will allow you to have cognition, to be social animals, so that not only do we get the bacteria as we pass through the birth canal, mother's milk has two sets of nutrients. One is to feed the baby. That's kind of obvious. But the mother also has in her milk sugars that are only digestible by certain microbes. And these are the microbes we want to flourish in our body. Things like bifidobacteria. Bifidobacteria are needed to give us the proper immune system. Also, they provide the environment that other bacteria, such as Bacteroides, can use to colonize the gut. And Bacteroides we need, because Bacteroides produces chemicals that tell the gut cells to make a compound, make a protein that causes the cells around them to make capillaries. So without the bacteria, you don't have the gut capillaries that take the food away. The bacteria are also needed to give us neurons needed for hearing, neurons needed for peristalsis. They also are involved in making our immune system a mature immune system. Those mice that are born without microbes from its mother have immunodeficiency syndrome like AIDS. So we are not individuals in the classic sense. We know that we can acquire new phenotypes when we acquire symbionts. So the soy bug, insect, Riptornis, acquires symbionts as it moves through the soil. And as it moves through the soil as a young bug, it gets these, and the symbionts are actually important. The gene is called Burkholderia. They're important in allowing the larval or the nymph bug to grow better. Okay, they're needed for nutrition in the bug. But these bacteria can also have pesticide resistance genes. And if they have pesticide resistance genes, they actually use the pesticide as food. So when the farmers put pesticide on the grounds, they're feeding these bacteria. The bacteria flourish, they get eaten by the bug, and the bug now has pesticide resistance. Okay. Similarly, the red turpentine beetle is a minor pest, if a pest at all, in the Pacific Northwest of America. It infects dead trees, and it uses fungi that it collects as symbionts to digest holes in trees. Not a problem, because it's mostly dead trees. They're not very powerful fungi. When this beetle got to China, it acquired new fungi. And these fungi can digest living trees. And it became a major agricultural pest. Tens of millions of trees in China have been destroyed by this beetle that got a new symbiont. So we know that you can actually acquire a new phenotype by getting a new symbiont. Now, this is a view of evolution that was pioneered by Lynn Margulis, who said that natural selection plays a minor but critical role. It is really for adaptation more than evolution. She saw it as a fine-tuning mechanism that adjusts the organism to changes in environment and prevents extinction. Now, this is very important when we're talking about, the Anthropocene and the possibility of the sixth major extinction event on the planet. This is important to prevent extinction. I'm not denying the importance of natural selection. But is it important for normal evolution? And here is where changes in development, including those mediated by symbionts, can be incredibly important. I like to say that development, including both symbiotic and internal modes of development, has the creativity of an artist. Development creates new phenotypes. Natural selection has the creativity of the curator. Not everything is worthy of surviving. Most things don't survive. Most organisms are food for other organisms. Most organisms don't survive, something that Darwin pointed out, which was incredibly important. And you also have to have organisms that will survive together. This compossibility that Leibniz, Darwin's favorite philosopher, pointed out. They have to be able to survive together, which meant ecosystems. Now, cooperation does not have to be soft and furry. It doesn't have to be a nurturing cooperation. Cooperation can also mean survival of the fittest. When we talk about the squid, Euprymna, which forms a light organ by absorbing on its belly a certain type of bacteria, Vibrio fischeri. Okay, and that together, they will make a light organ. They will cooperate to make a light organ. Wonderful. But in getting Vibrio fischeri on the cell surface, the squid poisons, tans, eliminates all the other bacteria. Okay, so there's competition to be part of the team. And that's the metaphor I like to use, is that each organism is a team. The Olympics are going on right now. There are team events. There's soccer, football, and you can have the best goalie on the planet. But if you don't have people who can score goals, they're useless. The team advances. It's the team that goes to the podium, not the goalie, not the forwards. So I like to say that we evolve as teams. So I'm team Scott Gilbert. You know, I wish I had a warm-up jacket, you know, a rally jacket with all my sponsors, Bacteroides, Bifidobacter, you know, okay. So I think that natural selection is important, but it's important in its curatorial role, in its preventing extinction, in its role in compossibility, in allowing things to live with other things. But as Lynn Margulis said, the higher taxa have evolved by acquisitions of symbionts that have become hereditary. Natural selection eliminates and maintains, but it doesn't create. So she also said that life did not take over the globe by combat, but by networking. It's these entanglements that are what's really critical. And so I think that this view of the holobiont is a critically new way of looking at evolution. It's not looking at group selection, because those are the same species. It's looking at consortia. It's looking at teams that have to co-evolve to make an organism. We're an ecosystem as well as an individual. They have to, if not co-evolve, that's too strong a word. They have to integrate together. They have to have co-metabolism and co-development in order to survive. And it's that which is being selected, the holobiont, not just the genomic lineage from the fertilized egg.
Before going to some philosophical aspects of what you said, there are many, but we will choose between some of them. There are some implications, not only for the biological theory, the theory of biology, but for example, for human medicine, for sure, and also for conservation. You mentioned the sixth mass extinction, and I think that integrating this view of eco-devo in our efforts of conserving nature can be important. What do you think?
Oh, I think that they're actually critical. That usually one doesn't talk about developmental biology when one talks about sustainability. But I think that's a very parochial attitude. I think that just as much as ecology needs to be part of the discussion, the roles of development need to be discussed. I mentioned, for instance, Riptornis, which gets its gene for pesticide resistance from its symbiont. I think also when we're talking, for instance, about global climate change, one of the main things we talk about, of course, is heat, is this incredible heating of the world. Now, heat is already having developmental effects. For instance, there are many organisms, some keystone species, such as turtles. Turtles have temperature-dependent sex determination. Males are made at lower temperature, females are made at higher temperatures during a certain period of embryonic development. And we know the pathway for this. We know the receptor, what's monitoring the temperature and how it's changing calcium ions going into the gonad rudiment. temperature determines sex in turtles and many reptiles. So this means that if you have higher temperatures, it means that almost all the turtles will be one sex. That's a horrible way to become extinct. And so we have in Australia some turtle rookeries where 95% of the population is turning to be female. That's better than 95% turning to be male, but it's still going in the direction of a monosexual species. We also know that the heat is destroying some phenologies, and phenology is the integration of life cycles. So when you think about birds feeding their young, and the birds feed their young caterpillars, okay? Classic picture of the bird giving a worm or a caterpillar to the young with its beak open, okay? Well, for that to occur, you need the coordination of the bird's young hatching at the same time as the caterpillars. But if one of them has a heat-sensitive life cycle, such as caterpillars, and another has a life cycle that's controlled by photoperiod, the less sunlight, such as birds, you can get a disruption of this nice coordination of temperature and solar cycle. This is what's evolved. But now we're finding that the caterpillars are coming out before the birds come out. And so the birds have a hard time finding caterpillars. So this can lead to extinction because the relationship is being destroyed. It isn't that you're destroying the birds per se. It isn't you're destroying the caterpillars and butterflies per se. You're destroying the relationship. And that's something that really hasn't been talked about much. And again, when you talk about relationships, one of the biggest symbiotic relationships in the world is the coral reef. And the coral reef is where the larva of the coral, this free swimming larva of the coral, acquires an algal symbiont. It acquires an algae, and it uses that algae to get its carbon nutrients. Its sugars come from the algae. Heat can destroy the relationship between the algae and the coral. And when it destroys that relationship, the algae are released from the coral. They flee the coral. The coral is left without its source of nutrients. And so the coral dies. And again, in Australia, something like 50% of the coral reefs have died over the past 20 years. And that's due to global climate change, to heat. And so people are trying to find ways. There are some corals which keep their symbionts longer. There are strains of algae which can take heat better. So people are trying to figure out ways of making coral reefs that will survive, a 2-3 degree centigrade rise in temperatures. The ones that we have now will have a tough time doing it. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that need to be discussed because the mechanisms are actually symbiotic webs of causation that can be destroyed by things like heat and ocean acidity. Yeah, we have to talk about development when we talk about conservation biology.
Yeah, and the notion of individuality, from what you said, is a philosophical question, but it has really practical effects on our human way to be in the world, our cooperative versus individualistic way to cope with our ecosystem. We are part of an ecosystem. So because no individual, no organism is a single, is an ecosystem itself, but is also part of a broader ecosystem. So what are the philosophical aspects that we talked about earlier of this new vision, this cooperative vision of life? in addition to the biological
Sure.
and ecological aspects.
Sure. I'm glad to say that some philosophers, such as Donna Haraway, are looking at the implications of symbiosis for how we build our universes. And the first principle, I think, is life is entanglement. Forget about purity. We are consortia of organisms, biomes as well as organisms, and we are integrated into our environment. Our environment, the bacteria, flow through us as we flow through the environment. We're talking that us as organisms that are not separated from the environment as we thought we had been. We are integrated into our environment. The bacteria that we have at any given moment decide who we are. And when we eat a cheeseburger, we become a different person because the bacteria that we have said, eat fat, here, all the fat digesting bacteria, here's a feast for you. It's different than when we eat spinach and kale and say, you know, this is for a different set of bacteria, enjoy. So we become different, and this can be important. How we use drugs, the drugs that we use for preventing heart attacks, for preventing epilepsy, for preventing cancers. These drugs are metabolized differently by different bacteria. And so this is why I don't think that the notion of the Human Genome Project's personalized medicine is a very good notion, because that's only looking at the genes that we inherit from our parents. It doesn't look at all the genes that we get and acquire from our symbionts. So first, life is entanglement. The second principle that Donna Haraway really brings out is that living beings become with the other. And that's not metaphorically, that's literally. We come into existence, we develop in association with microbes and with the organisms that bring those microbes to us. So we are not defined solely by our parents. We are defined largely by the other 50% of the cells in our body, the microbes. We become with others. The environment is essential in our coming into existence. The third thing, that competition is not the most important mode of interaction between species. Yes, it is critically important to fine-tune the organism for its environment. But if you look at the grand scheme of things, what keeps life on Earth alive is symbiosis. You have the rhizobacteria interacting with legumes to make the nitrogen in the air that we use for protein and nucleic acid synthesis. The nitrogen in the air is unusable until it becomes fixed, it becomes hydrated and hydrogenated, reduced. And that's done by this interaction between bacteria and legumes. The mycorrhizae on the plants that allow the roots to extend to get water and which interact with the roots of other plants to cooperate. Those are critical for the biomes that we see on land, as are endophytic fungi that protect against desiccation. The coral reef symbiosis and the clam seagrass symbiosis are critical for life in the ocean. So the notion that competition is what's the overarching theme of life is no, cooperation. Competition is probably one form of cooperation. It might be cooperation on a big scale. Richard Powers, in his book, The Overstory, talks about competition being one of the many flavors of cooperation. I like that. Competition is like for cooperation on a bigger level. But most of biology seems to be cooperation. The self is a very relational self. The notion that we're defined by our genes is nonsense. Genes allow us to do certain things. They also can constrain us, but what makes us us is a combination, as some of the early geneticists pointed out, a combination of genes and environment. And it's not additive, it's interpenetrating. There's not 40% genes, 60% environment, or 80% environment, 20% gene. No, they integrate together. Much of our drug metabolism, food metabolism, perhaps even our modes of thinking are aided by microbes. Mice without microbes are asocial. They have obsessive behaviors and they'd rather be alone than with other mice. So maybe the microbes are actually helping us interact with people, getting our neurons to want to be social animals. Enterococcus fetalis in mice is necessary for regulating levels of anxiety. You know, the bacteria are important not only in what we are, but in who we are. And so the question that was raised years ago by Lewis Wolpert was, if we knew the position of every molecule in the fertilized egg, could we predict the phenotype or behavior that will result in the adult? And the answer is no, we can't. The bacteria and also the other parts of the environment are absolutely critical. The other philosophical principle that I think comes in a big way, and again, Donna Haraway has been very good at pointing this out, is reciprocity. That reciprocity is like the main rule of life. And this has been the center of philosophies in many Eastern ways of thinking, in many indigenous societies. It's the rule in developmental biology that organs are produced by reciprocal induction, that the brain bulge tells the ectoderm, you are not going to become skin, you are going to become lens. And as the lens form, it tells the brain bulge, and you are not going to become brain, you are going to become retina. And they interact and they form each other. It's reciprocal induction. It's the coming into being reciprocally. We see this in fertilization. Although in fertilization, we always seem to stress competition. It's the sperm competing with one another for that prize, the egg. But actually, the egg and the sperm have to cooperate. And they cooperate in remarkable ways, such that the egg and its attendant cells produce chemicals that attract the sperm. The sperm have to figure out how to travel. They activate the sperm. And when the sperm get to the egg, the sperm does not bore in or drill in. In mammals, the egg actually envelops the sperm and the two become one. You know, it's not a violent competition, quite the opposite. So when we talk about fertilization, organ formation, developmental symbiosis, we're talking reciprocities. And Donna Haraway says reciprocal induction, she's using the embryonic term here. Reciprocal induction is the name of the game, and it's reciprocating complexity all the way down. And she's adamant at saying that it's relationships, not entities, that are the smallest possible pattern of analysis. She refuses to say unit of analysis because that would indicate something particular. She says pattern of analysis. Relationships, not entities, are the smallest possible pattern of analysis. And holobionts show the importance of metabolism, this interaction between them. So I think, getting back to kind of philosophy and biology, that the stories we tell are critically important. We are a storytelling species. There was a meeting in 2009 in Rome where the Jesuits brought together all sorts of evolutionary biologists, including a lot of people who study human evolution. And they were asked, you know, is there something that characterizes the human species? And one of the answers was, yeah, we like to tell good stories. Yeah, we're the only animals that tell stories to each other and repeat stories generation to generation. Now, Ursula Le Guin, who is a great storyteller, said that there have been stories of competition and stories of cooperation. But the stories of competition are much more fun. They are exciting stories. They are stories that make you wonder, is he going to survive or not? You know, the stories of competition are those that get transmitted. They get told. And she calls these the spear stories. The stories that don't get told tend to be those of the women, the carrier bag stories, the stories that are, you know, taking roots, taking nuts and putting them in a bag, putting a baby in a bag so that your hands are free. The carrier bag stories, these aren't as much fun. These aren't stories of drama. So what we tell tend to be the dramatic story. And she said, perhaps in the Anthropocene, as we face the threat of extinction, the carrier bag stories, the stories of cooperation, may become a lot more important to us. And I think that science is going, now it's finding these stories, it's reinterpreting old data even, to find the stories of incredible cooperation. And our most sophisticated, reductionist analytical technologies are finding relationships. They're finding symbiosis. We did not know about angiogenin 4 being induced by microbes until we could get high throughput RNA analysis. I mean, it's really amazing. The biology of the 20th century seems to be a biology of entities, the biology of the 20th and genes, and the biology of the 21st century, processes and symbiosis. That's at least how I see the field going.
And we hope you're right, because we need good stories for the Anthropocene, right? Yeah.
Good stories, yeah.
So thank you for being with us and for telling us a good story on the on the developmental biology. Thank you, Scott Gilbert.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.